Open book story. My mother-in-law rewrote my history. She didn't just rewrite my wedding vows, she rewrote my entire past. My mother-in-law turned me into the villain of my own life, but she never expected me to fight back with the truth. When Emily married Daniel, she thought she had found her forever. But her mother-in-law, Margaret, had other plans. Behind her sweet smile hid a sharp pen and a dangerous obsession with control. From rewriting Emily's family history to altering records, twisting stories, and turning the community against her, Margaret was determined to erase Emily's identity and paint her as unworthy. But secrets never stay buried forever. As Emily digs deeper into the lies, she uncovers shocking truths, not just about her marriage, but about Margaret's own past. What begins as a battle for dignity soon becomes a war for survival, reputation, and freedom. This is not just a story about family drama. It's about reclaiming your history when someone tries to steal it. The wedding vows that weren't mine. The church bells echoed across the small town of Greenville, a sleepy suburb in North Carolina where everyone knew everyone's business. The September air was warm, scented with magnolias, and sunlight spilled through stained glass windows, painting the altar in hues of ruby and gold. It should have been the happiest day of my life. After all, I was marrying Daniel Carter, the man who had promised me forever under an oak tree the night he first whispered, "I love you." My white gown trailed behind me like a cloud, and my father, nervous but proud, squeezed my hand before walking me down the aisle. But something felt wrong. When the pastor lifted a folded piece of paper, I froze. I had written my vows myself, pages filled with trembling handwriting and late-night tears. They were mine, my story, my truth. Yet the words that flowed from his mouth were not the ones I had written. Instead of, I grew up in a small, chaotic but loving household with a sister who taught me the meaning of resilience, the pastor read, I grew up as an only child, blessed with endless opportunities, raised in the perfect example of a quiet American home. My heart skipped a beat. That wasn't my story. I had a sister, Anna. She died when I was 15. She wasn't just part of my life. She shaped it. Erasing her was like ripping pages out of a book until the story no longer made sense. I glanced at Daniel. His smile was nervous but genuine, his eyes locked on me with devotion. He didn't notice the changes. Maybe he thought I'd edited them. Maybe he thought nerves had made me forget. But I hadn't. And then my eyes drifted further, toward the front pew. Margaret Carter, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, sat there like royalty on her throne. Her pearl necklace gleamed, her navy dress tailored to perfection. Her smile was sharp, deliberate, too satisfied. She wasn't just watching, she was savoring. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The vows went on, rewriting pieces of me. My late mother was described as a distant figure. My father, who worked double shifts at a mechanic's garage, was suddenly a business owner who provided a life of elegance. Every line was wrong, every sentence polished into something I had never been. It was as if the girl I had been, the messy, poor, resilient Emily, was unworthy of standing in this church. By the time the vows ended, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold Daniel's. But the pastor asked us to repeat them anyway, word for word. And I did. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt trapped. Hundreds of eyes were watching. My father's lips quivered, but he stayed silent. Daniel's grip was steady, oblivious. And Margaret? She leaned forward ever so slightly, a predator watching her prey surrender. When the words, I do, left my lips, I felt like I had just buried a part of myself. The applause that followed sounded hollow in my ears. As the reception unfolded later, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe the pastor had made a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. Margaret was behind it. She floated from guest to guest at the reception like a queen overseeing her kingdom, spinning stories with practiced charm. I overheard her telling Daniel's cousins how Emily always dreamed of a big, white wedding like this. A lie. I had wanted something small, intimate, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Later, When she embraced one of her friends, I caught her saying, "Emily has always been so grateful for the opportunities she had growing up." Such a refined upbringing. I nearly choked on my champagne. Refined? My family lived paycheck to paycheck. I wore thrift store dresses and dreamed of scholarships because college was never guaranteed. Refinement had nothing to do with it, survival did. When I finally found a quiet corner, Daniel joined me. His tie was loose, his cheeks flushed with happiness. "You look beautiful," he whispered, kissing my forehead. I forced a smile. "Did you hear the vows?" "They weren't mine." He chuckled. "Nerves, Em. Maybe you don't remember writing them that way." "No." I snapped sharper than I meant. "I remember every word I wrote." Daniel's smile faltered, confusion clouding his eyes. "Then maybe the pastor mixed them up. We can laugh about it later, okay? Don't let it ruin today." But it wasn't just today. Something much bigger was at play, and I could feel it pressing down on me like a shadow. As we left the reception that night, Margaret hugged me tightly. Too tightly. Her perfume was strong, roses mixed with something metallic. She leaned close and whispered in my ear, her words slicing through the noise of clinking glasses and laughter. "History is just a story, Emily. And stories can be rewritten." I pulled back, stunned, but her smile never wavered. That was the first time I realized my marriage wasn't just to Daniel. It was also to his mother, and she had already begun rewriting my history. A stranger's childhood. The morning after the wedding, I should have woken up feeling like a newlywed, hopeful, glowing, and wrapped in the promise of new beginnings. Instead, I felt unsettled. The hotel suite was quiet except for Daniel's steady breathing beside me. I stared at the ceiling, the events of yesterday looping through my mind like a broken reel. The vows. Margaret's whisper. The way she looked at me, as though she already owned the narrative of my life. I told myself I was overreacting. Weddings were stressful. Maybe it had all been a misunderstanding. But the illusion shattered just 2 days later. Daniel had gone back to work. He was already busy at his father's firm, and I stopped by Margaret's house to pick up a box of wedding gifts she had insisted on storing for us. The Carter home was a sprawling colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. Everything about it screamed perfection. It stood in stark contrast to the house I grew up in, a 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood where paint peeled and neighbors argued loud enough to echo through thin walls. Margaret welcomed me, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, darling," she said, ushering me in. Come in, come in. I was just having tea." The living room smelled like lavender polish, every surface gleaming. Framed photos lined the walls, Daniel's childhood frozen in glossy perfection. Birthday parties with balloon arches, summer vacations in matching outfits, trophies polished until they shone. I sat stiffly on the couch, my hands folded in my lap. Margaret poured tea into delicate china cups, her movements graceful, rehearsed. "Daniel is very lucky," she said, handing me a cup. "You fit into this family beautifully." The word fit made me flinch. I didn't want to fit into some mold she designed. I wanted to belong as myself. But before I could respond, Margaret leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "I've been telling everyone how wonderful your upbringing was. So refined, so cultured. Greenville society loves to hear about your mother's charity work and your father's successful business." My fingers tightened around the teacup. "That's not true," I said carefully. "My dad's a mechanic. My mom, she passed away when I was young. She never did charity work. And I stopped myself before admitting just how poor we had been. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Details. You don't need to cling to that version of events anymore. You're Carter now. Appearances matter." I stared at her, my chest tightening. That version of events is my life. It's my truth. Her smile widened, calm and cruel. "Truth is malleable, Emily. People remember what they're told. I've already introduced you to several women at the country club as the daughter of a respected businessman. They were very impressed. Would you really rather they know your father spends his days covered in grease?" The insult stung sharper than I expected. My father had worked his hands raw to keep food on the table. He might not have worn a suit, but he was honorable, worthy. Before I could argue, Margaret rose and walked to a shelf, pulling out a leather-bound scrapbook. She handed it to me with a strange smile. "Look," she said. I opened the book and froze. Inside were photos of me. At least, they looked like me. But the captions beneath them told a different story. A photo from my college graduation, where I stood with my father in his work overalls, was labeled, "Emily with her father, a respected entrepreneur," on her graduation day. Another page showed a picture of me at 16, holding Anna's hand. Only Anna's face was cut out. A neat oval-shaped hole remained, leaving my hand clasped around empty space. My throat closed. "Where's my sister?" I whispered. Margaret sipped her tea, unfazed. "You never had a sister. It's confusing for people when you bring her up. Best not to complicate things." I slammed the book shut. She was real. Her name was Anna. She died in a car accident. You can't just erase her. Margaret's eyes flickered with irritation, though her tone remained smooth. "People remember what fits. I am shaping your story to fit. That is a gift, Emily. You should be thanking me." My hands shook. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about appearances. This was an obsession. Margaret wasn't polishing details. She was rewriting my entire history, line by line, as if the girl I had been wasn't acceptable. I wanted to leave, but as I stood, she caught my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You will destroy Daniel if you cling to your messy past," she hissed, her mask slipping for a moment. "He needs a wife who elevates him, not drags him down." I yanked free, my heart pounding. "Daniel loves me for who I am, not for the lies you're spreading." Her smile snapped back into place. "We'll see." That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to tell him everything. I told him about the scrapbook, about Anna's erased face, about Margaret's fabricated stories. But Daniel just sighed, loosening his tie. You know how my mom is. She embellishes things. She likes to present a good image. It doesn't mean she doesn't accept you." "Doesn't accept me?" I snapped. "She's cutting out my sister from photos, Daniel. She's rewriting who I am." Daniel frowned, rubbing his temples. "You're making too much of this. She just wants people to like you. Isn't that a good thing?" I stared at him, stunned. How could he not see the danger? This wasn't harmless embellishment, it was erasure. But Daniel kissed my forehead, weary and distracted. "Please, don't start a war with her. Not now. Not when we're just beginning our marriage." So, I swallowed my words. For his sake. For peace. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because Margaret hadn't just rewritten my vows. She was rewriting my childhood. And if I didn't stop her, soon there would be nothing left of me at all. The erased sister. 2 weeks after the wedding, Daniel and I hosted our first dinner party as newlyweds. It was supposed to be simple, just a few of his colleagues from the firm, plus his parents. I wanted to impress, to prove I could belong in his world without sacrificing who I was. I cooked all afternoon, filling our little townhouse with the smell of rosemary chicken, garlic bread, and peach cobbler the way my mother used to make. Cooking had always been my way of keeping Anna close. She loved food, always sneaking into the kitchen to taste things before they were done. As I set the table, I placed a small framed picture of Anna on the sideboard. She was 14 in the photo, her hair tangled, her grin wide. That picture traveled with me through college, through heartbreak, through everything. She was part of me. When the guests arrived, the evening started smoothly. Laughter filled the room, wine glasses clinked, and I felt, for the first time since the wedding, almost comfortable. Until Margaret noticed the photograph. She was mid-conversation when her eyes landed on it. Her smile froze, and the air seemed to shift. She excused herself from the table, walked straight to the sideboard, and lifted the frame with delicate fingers. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice honey-sweet but razor-sharp. I blinked. "That's Anna. My sister." The room went quiet. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his fork clinking against his plate. Margaret tilted her head, studying the picture as though it were evidence in a trial. But Emily, you don't have a sister. You've always been an only child. Isn't that right? The words hit like a slap. I laughed, though it came out brittle. Of course I had a sister.
Anna.
She died when I was 15. I've told you this before. Margaret's smile deepened, but her eyes were cold. You must be misremembering, dear. Daniel, have you ever heard Emily mention a sister before? Daniel's face flushed. He looked between us, caught like a child between warring parents. She's mentioned someone. But maybe. I snapped, my voice breaking. Daniel, you've seen her picture in my dorm, in my apartment, in my journals. You know Anna was real. Margaret set the frame back on the sideboard with a theatrical sigh. Emily has such a vivid imagination. Sometimes grief makes us invent people to cope. The guests exchanged awkward glances. My cheeks burned. Invent? Are you insane? Emily, Margaret said, her voice lowering to that dangerous whisper only I seem to hear. Stories need consistency. A tragic sister confuses people. Best to let that memory go. Something in me cracked. I stood, my chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Anna was real. She is real. And if you ever try to erase her again, I swear. Emily. Daniel's voice was sharp, silencing me. His colleagues stared at their plates. Margaret looked wounded, as though I had just cursed in church. Sit down, Daniel hissed. My chest heaved, but I sat, trembling. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Margaret resumed her polite chatter as though nothing had happened, while I sat with rage burning holes in my stomach. Later that night, when the guests had gone, Daniel closed the door and turned on me.
What was that? He demanded.
She said Anna wasn't real. My voice cracked, raw. She's cutting her out of my life, Daniel. Out of our life. Daniel rubbed his temples. You embarrass me tonight. My colleagues don't need to hear family drama at the dinner table. This isn't drama, I shot back. This is my sister. My history. Your mother is trying to erase her. Daniel's jaw tightened. Maybe she doesn't mean it the way you think. My mom has her ways. I cut him off. Her ways are dangerous. She rewrote my vows. She rewrote my childhood. Now she's erasing my sister. What's next, Daniel? What's left of me, if I let her keep going? He didn't answer. Instead, he poured himself a drink, shoulders slumping with exhaustion. I can't fight both of you. Please, just keep the peace.
Keep the peace.
The words echoed in my skull as I lay awake that night. Margaret wasn't just rewriting details, she was rewriting me. And Daniel wanted me to let her. The following weekend, I visited my father. His house smelled like motor oil and coffee, exactly as it always had. He hugged me tightly, his rough hands lingering on my shoulders as though he sensed the storm brewing inside me. When I told him what Margaret had said, that Anna wasn't real, his face darkened, lines etching deeper around his eyes. She's playing games, he muttered. Dangerous ones. She's cutting Anna out of pictures, Dad. Out of conversations. Out of existence. My father's voice trembled with rage. Anna mattered. She mattered. No one gets to erase her. Tears burned my eyes. What do I do? He looked at me, weary but firm. You fight, Emily. You hold on to Anna with everything you've got. Because the moment you let Margaret take her away, you'll lose yourself too. That night, back in the townhouse, I stood in front of the mirror, holding Anna's picture. My reflection looked tired, almost unfamiliar. Margaret's words haunted me. Stories can be rewritten. But not this one. Not Anna's. Not mine. I whispered to the glass, to the girl who had been my anchor through every storm. They can try to erase you, Anna. But I won't let them. And in that moment, I knew Margaret and I were at war. Only it wasn't just a war for respect anymore. It was a war for memory, for truth, for my very identity. And I wasn't sure Daniel would choose my side. Paper lies. It began with a letter. A crisp, cream-colored envelope, delivered by the mailman on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was at work. My name written in perfect cursive across the front. Inside was a congratulatory note from the Greenville Ladies Association, welcoming me as their newest member. I had never applied. Curious, I read further, and my stomach dropped. The letter praised Emily Carter, daughter of distinguished businessman Richard Davis and charitable socialite, the late Margaret Davis. It spoke of my refined upbringing and privileged education. My father was a mechanic. My mother had never set foot in a country club, let alone led charity galas. And my last name growing up wasn't Davis. It was Miller. I stared at the paper, my pulse hammering. Margaret. That afternoon, I drove to her house, clutching the letter like evidence. She greeted me with her usual polished smile, her pearls gleaming in the soft light of her chandelier. Emily, darling. What a surprise. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Why did you send this? I held out the letter. Her smile never faltered. Because it's the version of you that people respect. My hands shook. This isn't respect, it's a lie. You changed my last name, you gave my parents lives they never lived, you. Margaret cut me off smoothly. Your father works with his hands. People in Daniel's circle look down on that. I've simply elevated your history. You should be grateful. Grateful? I choked out. You erased my mother. You erased my father's pride. You're making me into someone I'm not. Margaret leaned closer, her perfume heavy, her voice sharp. And what are you without this, Emily? A girl from a shabby rental house, with nothing but tragedy in her past? Do you think Daniel deserves that? Do you think he would have chosen you if not for what I made you? Her words sliced deep. For a flicker of a second, doubt poisoned me. Would Daniel have chosen me if Margaret hadn't polished my rough edges for the world? I shook my head violently.
No.
Daniel had fallen in love with me, the real me, the girl who cried when she cooked her mother's cobbler, who carried Anna's memory like a scar and a gift. But Margaret didn't stop there. The next day, while sorting through boxes in the townhouse, I found something that froze me cold. A high school yearbook.
Mine.
Or so I thought. At first glance, everything looked normal, my name, my senior photo. But as I flipped through, unease crawled up my spine. My best friend from high school, Laura, was missing entirely. In her place were unfamiliar names. Anna, my sister, wasn't in the in-memory page. The yearbook listed me as an only child. My hands went numb. I tore through the pages, bile rising in my throat. The clubs I had joined, drama, debate, were replaced with equestrian and art guild. None of it was true. I flipped to the back cover. A faint embossing caught my eye. Greenville Historical Reprints. It wasn't my real yearbook. It was a fabricated copy. Someone had gone to the trouble of creating an alternate version of my high school life. And I didn't need to ask who. That night, I confronted Daniel. I slammed the yearbook on the table so hard he jumped. Look at this, I demanded. He opened it, brows furrowing. What is this? It's fake, I said. She had it made. She's rewriting my life in print now. She erased Anna, erased my friends, erased everything real about me. Daniel rubbed his forehead. This is extreme. Why would my mom even? Because she wants to control me. My voice cracked. She wants to build the version of me that she approves of. And she's going to keep doing it until there's nothing left of me. Daniel exhaled, slamming the book shut. I'll talk to her. But I could see it in his eyes, hesitation.
Fear.
His mother had always ruled the Carter family with an iron grip wrapped in silk. And Daniel had never truly stood against her. Days later, I caught Margaret in action. I stopped by her house unexpectedly, hoping to catch her off guard. I followed the sound of her voice to the study, and froze in the doorway. She sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, surrounded by papers. Documents. Copies of my birth certificate, my college transcripts, even my medical records. Yes, she was saying sweetly. Emily Davis. Born 1992. Yes, I'll fax you the updated file. My breath caught. Updated file? I burst into the room. What are you doing? Margaret hung up calmly, her face smooth as glass. Just helping tidy up your records. You'd be surprised how many inconsistencies I've already fixed. Those aren't inconsistencies. My voice shook with rage. They're my life. She stood, smoothing her skirt. A life unfit for Carter. I'm giving you a better one. No, I whispered, clutching the doorframe for balance. You're stealing mine? Her eyes gleamed. Emily, darling, don't be so dramatic. History is written by the survivors. And in this family, that survivor is me. That night, I sat alone on the floor of my townhouse, the fake yearbook in one hand, and his photo in the other. Margaret had crossed from whispers and stories into documents and records. She wasn't just rewriting memories, she was forging reality. If she could alter yearbooks, records, even birth certificates, then how long before the world believed her version over mine? The thought sent ice through my veins. I pressed Anna's photo to my chest, tears blurring my vision. She can't take you from me, I whispered. She can't. But in the silence of the night, I realized the truth. Margaret wasn't stopping. She was only just beginning. And I had no idea how far she would go to erase me completely. The perfect wife she wanted. By October, the leaves in Greenville had turned crimson and gold, crunching beneath my shoes as I walked. I should have been enjoying newlywed bliss. Pumpkin spice candles, lazy weekends with Daniel, carving our first pumpkin together. Instead, I felt like I was living in someone else's skin. Margaret's skin. It began with small suggestions. You should wear pearls, Emily. They're timeless. Perhaps a softer shade of lipstick. Bold colors don't suit our family's image. Ladies at the firm's gala wear heels, not flats. Comfort is for the home. At first, I brushed them off. But then Daniel started repeating them. Mom thinks you'd look amazing in navy blue. Mom suggested you try the salon on Fifth. Her stylist is great. Mom says the wives at the firm really value community work. Maybe you should look into charity boards. It was subtle but constant. Margaret's voice echoed through Daniel until it seeped into my marriage like poison. One evening, Daniel came home carrying a garment bag. He looked excited, like he'd bought me something special. Open it, he urged. I unzipped the bag and froze. Inside was a pale lavender gown, floor-length, sequined, elegant in a way that screamed Margaret Carter. It's for the firm's charity gala next weekend, Daniel explained. Mom picked it out, said it would flatter you perfectly. I touched the fabric, cold under my fingertips. It wasn't me. I preferred warm tones, soft fabrics, dresses I could actually breathe in. Still, I forced a smile. It's beautiful. Daniel kissed my cheek. She just wants to help. You'll look stunning. But the truth gnawed at me. It wasn't about looking stunning. It was about molding me into the wife Margaret wanted for her son. The night of the gala, I wore the dress. Margaret beamed the moment she saw me, her eyes sweeping over me like a sculptor admiring her creation. Perfect, she whispered. You look exactly as I imagined. Those words chill me more than the October air. All evening, she paraded me from group to group, introducing me not as Emily Miller, Daniel's wife, but as Emily Carter, raised in a distinguished household, always destined for refinement. I smiled, nodded, played the part. Inside, I was screaming. Every story she told chipped away at the girl I had been. At one point, I overheard her whispering to a colleague's wife, Emily's so well suited for Daniel. She's nothing like the wild, messy girl she used to be. Wild, messy girl. That was me. That was who Daniel had fallen in love with. The girl who danced barefoot in the rain, who laughed too loudly, who cooked late-night pancakes at 2 a.m. for no reason. But Margaret had decided that version of me didn't belong. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Margaret invited me to brunch at the country club. I didn't want to go, but Daniel insisted. It'll mean a lot to her, he said. I wore a soft sweater dress, something comfortable but classy. When I arrived, Margaret's eyes flicked over me, her lips tightening. You didn't wear the pearls, she said. I didn't feel like it, I replied. Her smile was thin. Image matters, Emily. We sat with 3 other women. wives of Daniel's colleagues. Margaret did most of the talking, weaving stories about my charity interests, my passion for equestrian sports, my quiet elegance. Each word felt like a dagger. Finally, one of the women asked me directly, "So, Emily, how did you get into horseback riding?" I froze. My childhood had been spent climbing trees, not riding horses. I'd never even touched one. But Margaret's eyes bore into me, daring me to contradict her. I swallowed. "I used to ride at a friend's farm." I lied. The words tasted bitter. The women nodded approvingly, and Margaret's smile widened. That night, I stormed into the townhouse, ripping off the sweater dress and throwing it onto the floor. Daniel watched in shock as I paced, tears streaking my cheeks. "She's turning me into someone else," I shouted. "Do you even see it? She's dressing me, scripting me, making me lie about who I am." Daniel rubbed his temples, exhausted.
Please.
"She's just trying to help you fit in." "Fit in?" I screamed. "I don't want to fit in. I want to be me. The woman you fell in love with. Not some doll your mother dresses up and parades around." Silence filled the room. Daniel finally said, softly, Maybe she has a point. Maybe a little polish isn't such a bad thing." My heart cracked. "So, you'd rather have her version of me than the real me?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. I spent that night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, and his photo clutched to my chest. Margaret wasn't just rewriting my past anymore. She was rewriting my present. My clothes, my hobbies, my stories. Even Daniel was starting to believe her version of me was better. And I realized with a sick twist in my gut, if I didn't fight back soon, I would disappear entirely. Cracks in the castle. The first snow of December powdered Greenville like confectioner's sugar. From the outside, Daniel's family looked like the picture of success. Holiday wreaths on the townhouse door, invitations to galas, photos of smiling faces framed along the walls. But I'd begun to see the cracks. It started with a letter. I was searching the kitchen drawers for a recipe card when I found it, tucked beneath Margaret's neat stacks of bills. An envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in looping handwriting. Margaret Whitmore. Whitmore. Not Carter. I froze. Whitmore wasn't a name I'd ever heard Daniel mention. Carefully, I slipped the letter open. Inside was a half-page note, dated 30 years ago. "Maggie, I can't believe you'd erase me like this. After everything, you pretend I never existed? One day, your perfect mask will crack, and the truth will spill. Until then, remember I know who you really are." No signature. Just the sting of accusation, ink faded with time. I tucked it back quickly, my pulse racing.
Who had written it?
A sibling? An old lover? Someone Margaret had wronged? The thought lingered. Maybe I wasn't the only one whose history Margaret had rewritten. That night, during dinner at her house, I watched her closely. She was dressed impeccably, of course. Emerald silk, pearls gleaming at her throat. She talked about the charity drive she was hosting, about the firm's end-of-year plans. But when Daniel mentioned family, her smile faltered. "Mom," he said casually, "you've never told Emily much about your own childhood. Where exactly did you grow up?" Margaret's fork paused midair. Then she laughed softly, too quickly. "Oh, darling, it's not worth talking about. A small town in Maine. Nothing of interest." Her eyes flicked to me for a split second, sharp, warning, as though daring me to ask more. I didn't. But my mind burned with questions. The cracks widened when I visited the library 2 days later. I'd gone to clear my head, but curiosity dragged me to the archives. I typed Margaret Whitmore, Maine into the database. At first, nothing. Then, an article from a small-town paper, dated 1979. Local girl Margaret Whitmore wins state debate competition. The photo was grainy, but the smile was unmistakable. Margaret, younger, eyes brighter, holding a trophy. Whitmore wasn't a mistake. It was her name. But why had she abandoned it? As I flipped through the archives, another article surfaced, dated a year later. Tragedy strikes Whitmore family. House fire claims parents' lives.
My heart sank.
The article said Margaret, 17, had been the sole survivor. No mention of siblings. No mention of what happened after. Why had she never told Daniel? Why bury an entire identity? I decided to test her. At Sunday dinner, while Margaret poured wine, I said casually, "Daniel, did you know your mom was a debate champion in high school? I saw the clipping in the library." Margaret's hand froze. A single drop of wine spilled onto the tablecloth. "Oh." Daniel looked curious. "Really, Mom? You never mentioned that." Margaret forced a laugh. "Ancient history, darling. Nothing worth remembering." But her eyes were locked on me. Cold. Unblinking. Later, as we cleared the dishes, she leaned close enough that her perfume suffocated me. "Stay out of things that don't concern you," she whispered, her smile still plastered on for Daniel's sake. The threat was unmistakable. That night, I told Daniel everything: the letter, the Whitmore name, the articles. He frowned. You shouldn't go digging. If Mom hasn't told me, maybe it's because it hurts. Losing her parents that young, who knows what she went through? But don't you see?" I pressed. "She's rewritten her own story. Just like she's rewriting mine. Don't you think that's connected?" Daniel shook his head. "You're overthinking. She's just private." But I wasn't convinced. The final crack appeared a week before Christmas. I stopped by Margaret's unannounced to drop off a gift. She wasn't home, but the housekeeper let me in. As I waited, I wandered into her study. On her desk sat a silver-framed photo. At first glance, it looked like a family portrait. Margaret as a teenager, standing beside a young man with the same sharp eyes and dark hair. On the back, faintly written, "Me and David, 1978.
David.
I flipped through my memories. Daniel had never mentioned an uncle. Margaret had never spoken of a brother.
Why?
The sound of the front door jolted me. I quickly set the frame back down. Margaret entered, surprised to see me. Her eyes darted to the desk. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked rattled. "Next time," she said tightly, "call before coming over. Privacy matters." Her voice carried more than irritation. It carried fear. That night, lying in bed beside Daniel, I realized something chilling. Margaret wasn't just obsessed with rewriting my history. She had rewritten her own. Erased names, hidden truths, constructed a flawless facade. But facades don't last forever. And I was determined to find out what she was hiding before she erased me completely. The ghost brother. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked through downtown Greenville, the December air biting at my cheeks. Every step I took carried the weight of the photograph I'd seen, Margaret standing beside a young man, David, whose name had never once crossed Daniel's lips. The omission gnawed at me.
Margaret had erased me, yes.
But she had also erased him.
Why?
I returned to the library, the only place that felt safe to ask questions Margaret didn't want answered. I searched through the archives again, this time for David Whitmore. There he was. Local teen arrested in connection with bar fight. Whitmore boy suspended from high school after altercation. Police investigate hit and run, David Whitmore questioned. Each article painted a picture of a troubled young man, the opposite of the polished perfection Margaret demanded of everyone around her. But then, one final headline made my breath catch. Whitmore teen missing after parents' death, presumed runaway. The date was the same year as the fire that killed Margaret's parents. He hadn't died in the fire. He had vanished. That night, I brought it up to Daniel carefully, sitting with him by the tree we had decorated in our townhouse. The lights twinkled warmly, but the conversation was ice cold. "Daniel," I began softly, "did your mom ever mention an uncle? A brother?" He frowned.
No.
She was an only child.
Why?
I hesitated, then showed him the photo I'd discreetly taken with my phone. This is her. With him. The back says David, 1978. Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Where did you get this?" "Her study." I shouldn't have looked, but you shouldn't have, he cut in, his voice sharp. "Emily, this is her private past. If she hasn't told me, it's for a reason." "But don't you see?" I whispered. "She's been rewriting everything. Her own life.
Mine.
Don't you want to know why?" Daniel rubbed his face, torn. Finally, he said, if Mom wanted me to know, she'd tell me. Let it go. But I couldn't. The next day, I drove out to Maine. The little town of Hollowell was 3 hours away, a place frozen in time. Old brick buildings, a single diner, and a cemetery with stones weathered by decades. I found the diner first. An elderly waitress eyed me curiously as I slid into a booth. Excuse me, I said gently, showing her the photo on my phone. Do you know this family? Whitmores. Her brows shot up.
Lord, yes.
Everyone knew the Whitmore kids. Maggie and David. Tragic story, that one. My heart thudded. What happened to David? She lowered her voice, leaning closer. After their parents died in that fire, David, he wasn't the same. Folks said he caused trouble, got into fights. Some whispered he was mixed up in worse things, stolen cars, maybe drugs. Then one day, poof.
Gone.
Maggie said he ran away.
But
she trailed off, eyes distant. But what? I pressed. She glanced around, then whispered. Not everyone believed her. Some thought she knew more than she let on. The words clung to me all the way home. When I walked into Margaret's house later that week, she was hosting her holiday cocktail party. The place glowed with golden lights, carolers at the door, champagne flowing. To everyone else, she was the queen of perfection. But I saw the shadows. As guests mingled, I slipped upstairs to her study again. I didn't know what I was looking for, just that answers lay somewhere within those walls. In the bottom drawer of her desk, I found it, a box, old and worn, tied with a ribbon. Inside were papers, letters, photographs, and at the very bottom, an arrest record. Name, David Whitmore. Charge, assault, 1979. Outcome, case dismissed. I barely had time to register it before the door creaked open. Margaret stood there, her face calm but her eyes burning. Looking for something? I froze, the papers trembling in my hands. She stepped forward, shut the door behind her. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Emily. My voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell Daniel about him? About David? Her smile was ice. Because David doesn't exist. I shook my head. That's not true. I've seen the records, the articles. David doesn't exist, she repeated, each word like a gavel strike. Not anymore. Her mask slipped then, just for a second. I saw the fury, the fear, the desperation. Some people don't deserve to be remembered, she whispered. And with that, she snatched the papers from my hands and locked the box away. That night, as I lay awake beside Daniel, her words echoed in my mind. Some people don't deserve to be remembered. Margaret hadn't just erased her brother. She had buried him. And if she could bury her own blood, what chance did I have of keeping my true self alive in her world? Buried truths. The days leading up to Christmas blurred together, wrapped in lights and tinsel. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Our townhouse decorated, carols on the radio, invitations arriving for holiday dinners. But beneath it all, I carried the weight of David Whitmore's ghost. Margaret had said he didn't exist. But I knew the truth. He had existed, and she had buried him. The question was, why? I started with the box. Though Margaret had locked it away, I had memorized the look of it, the worn edges, the faded ribbon. I couldn't stop thinking about what else it held. Arrest records were one thing, but what if it contained proof of something darker? I confided in Anna's photo, like I always did when I needed strength. If she erased him, she can erase me too. I can't let that happen. So, I went back to Maine. This time, I didn't go to the diner. I went to the town clerk's office, a squat building with dusty blinds and the faint smell of old paper. The clerk, a man in his 60s, raised a brow as I asked about the Whitmores. He said, rummaging through the files. Sad story. Parents gone in that fire. Girl moved away. Boy disappeared. He slid a folder across the counter. Inside were coroner's reports, property deeds, old police records. One report in particular froze my blood. Incident report, December 1979. Subject, David Whitmore. Details, Following altercation at local bar, subject injured. Released into custody of sister, Margaret Whitmore. Disappeared from town 2 days later. Scrawled at the bottom, case closed. Presumed runaway. But another sheet, tucked behind, told a different story. Anonymous statement. Saw Maggie arguing with David behind the bar that night. Voices raised. She said, "You'll ruin everything." He never came back. My fingers trembled as I copied the file. If this was true, Margaret hadn't just erased him. She might have had something to do with his disappearance. Back home, I wrestled with whether to tell Daniel. He was decorating the tree when I finally blurted, "Your mom had a brother, David, and I think she made him disappear." He dropped the ornament in his hand, glass shattering across the floor. "Emily, stop. I'm not making this up," I said desperately. "I have police records, witness statements. She's hiding something huge, Daniel. Don't you want to know?" But instead of anger at Margaret, his fury turned on me. "What I want," he snapped, "is for you to stop tearing my family apart. My mom has been nothing but good to us. And you," his voice cracked, "you're obsessed. This isn't healthy." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. He swept up the glass and left the room without another word. The next day, Margaret showed up at my door. She stood in her fur coat, snowflakes dusting her hair, her smile polished as ever. But her eyes were knives. "Daniel told me you've been digging," she said smoothly. I swallowed hard. I deserved to know the truth. The truth. She stepped closer, her perfume cloying. The truth is, David was a lost cause. He was reckless, dangerous. He would have dragged me down with him. So I cut him out. And I've built a life worth having. Her voice dropped lower, almost tender. "You should be grateful, Emily. I'm giving you the same chance. I'm rewriting you into something worthy of Daniel. Do you really want to end up forgotten like David?" My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Daniel doesn't love your version of me," I whispered. "He loved me as I was." Her smile widened, cold and triumphant. "Then why is he slipping away from you?" Her words echoed long after she left. She was right. Daniel was slipping away. He was already starting to believe her version of me. If I didn't do something soon, I would vanish just like David. That night, I pulled out all the evidence, the photo, the reports, the copied statement. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces. There had to be a way to prove it, to expose Margaret before she erased me completely. But as I stared at David's young face in that photo, I realized something chilling. Margaret wasn't just rewriting history. She was making sure no one lived to tell the truth. Shattered illusions. Christmas Eve should have been filled with warmth, crackling fire, carols, and the smell of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. Instead, it was the night everything began to unravel. I had gathered the evidence into a folder. Copies of police reports, the photo of Margaret and David, the anonymous statement about their fight. I couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Daniel had to see it, had to understand what kind of woman his mother truly was. When he came home from work, cheeks red from the cold, I handed him the folder without a word. "What's this?" he asked, brows knitting. "Proof," I said softly. "About your mother. About David." He hesitated, then sat at the table and began flipping through the papers. At first, his expression was confusion. Then disbelief. Then anger, but not at the papers. At me. "Emily," his voice shook. "Where did you get these?" "The town clerk in Hollowell. The library. I've been piecing it together." He slammed the folder shut. "Do you hear yourself? Digging through decades-old files? Spying on my mother's past? This is insane." "It's the truth, Daniel," I pleaded. "She erased her own brother."
She's doing the same to me.
"Don't you see the pattern?" He pushed back from the table, pacing. "All I see is my wife obsessed with destroying the only parent I have left. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "Yes," I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. "I lost my sister, remember? But I didn't erase her. I keep her memory alive. That's what family is supposed to do." The room went silent. The Christmas tree lights blinked cheerfully, mocking the tension between us. Finally, Daniel whispered, "You're making me choose, aren't you? Between you and her." My heart cracked.
No.
"I'm asking you to open your eyes before she destroys us both." The next evening, Christmas dinner at Margaret's was suffocating. Her townhouse gleamed like a magazine spread, silver garland draped across the banister, a roast on the table, crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. To anyone else, it was perfection.
To me, it was a stage.
Margaret played hostess flawlessly, laughing lightly, offering compliments, ensuring every detail was controlled. She looked at me often, her smile tight, daring me to break the illusion. Halfway through dinner, Daniel excused himself to take a call. The moment he left the room, Margaret leaned across the table. "You should have stopped, Emily," she whispered, voice laced with venom. "Now you've forced his hand." My fork froze. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, feigning pity. "He's beginning to see it, how unstable you are, how ungrateful, how wrong for him. Soon, you'll be nothing more than a chapter in his life he'll regret." The words sliced deeper than any knife. But then I remembered the folder. Daniel hadn't thrown it away, he'd taken it with him. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was starting to crack through. When we returned home, Daniel barely spoke. He placed the folder on the mantel, untouched. His silence was worse than shouting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I crept to the living room, lit only by the tree. I opened the folder again, staring at David's face in that faded photo. Suddenly, I heard Daniel's voice behind me. "Why can't you let it go?" I turned. He stood there, tired, broken. "Because if I let it go," I whispered, "then she wins. And I lose myself, just like David did." For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. A tiny crack. But before I could press further, he shook his head. "I don't know who to believe anymore." He walked away, leaving me with the unbearable realization. Margaret had succeeded. She had planted so much doubt between us that our marriage was splintering. And unless I found something undeniable, something that even Daniel couldn't ignore, I was going to lose him. 2 nights later, the undeniable came. I was cleaning up after dinner when a knock echoed at the door. A man stood there, rugged, worn, with eyes so familiar it made me gasp. "Are you Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes." He hesitated, then pulled a faded ID from his pocket. "David Whitmore." The air left my lungs. He was alive. The history she couldn't erase. For a moment, I couldn't move. The man standing in my doorway looked like a ghost carved into flesh. His hair was streaked with gray, his face weathered, but his eyes, the same sharp, restless eyes from Margaret's photograph, were alive. "David Whitmore." My voice cracked. "Everyone thought you were dead." "Not dead," he said, stepping inside. "Just erased." The weight of his words sent shivers down my spine. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place I had fought with Daniel so many times. David wrapped his hands around a mug of coffee, staring into the steam as though it might rewrite the years he had lost. "Your mother-in-law," he said slowly, "doesn't want me remembered. That's why she told everyone I ran away. That's why she built her life without me in it." "Why?" I whispered. He looked up, his eyes tired. "Because I wasn't perfect. I got into fights, made mistakes. After the fire, I fell apart. She hated that I reminded her of where we came from. She wanted a clean slate, so she cut me out. Said I was poison. Said I didn't exist anymore." His jaw tightened. "And she made everyone believe it." I thought of Margaret's words. Some people don't deserve to be remembered. My stomach turned. The next day, Daniel came home to find David sitting on our couch. His face drained of color. "Who?" he stammered. "Who is this?" I held my breath. "Daniel, this is your uncle." Daniel's eyes flicked between us, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "That's impossible," Mom said. "Your mom lied," David interrupted, his voice steady. "She's been lying your whole life." Daniel staggered back, gripping the edge of the wall. No, I would have known. She would have told me. She didn't want you to know me, David said softly. Because I wasn't part of the story she wanted to tell. I was the blemish. The reminder. So she erased me. Just like she's trying to erase your wife. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Daniel's world, the world Margaret had built for him, was cracking wide open. That evening, we went to Margaret's house. She opened the door, perfectly composed as always, until her eyes landed on David. For the first time since I'd known her, she lost control. Her face drained of color, her lips parted in shock. No, she whispered. You can't be here. I'm here, Maggie, David said. And I'm not going anywhere this time. Her mask slipped. The polished, immaculate Margaret was gone, replaced by a woman cornered. You don't get to come back after all these years, she hissed. You ruined everything. You nearly destroyed me. I built this life because you were gone. David's voice cracked, raw with decades of pain. I didn't ruin you, Maggie.
You ruined me.
You made me disappear. You told the world I didn't exist. But I do. And I'm standing right here. Daniel stood between them, his face pale, his hands trembling. Mom, his voice broke. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you lie? Margaret's eyes filled with desperate fury. Because you didn't need him. You had me. You had perfection. Do you think you'd be where you are if people knew you came from that? She pointed at David like he was filth. Daniel's jaw tightened. All my life, you've been rewriting stories.
About you.
About Emily.
About me.
But this was too far. For once, Margaret had no answer. Her empire of control, her decades of careful rewriting, had shattered with David's return. When we left, Margaret remained in her doorway, a queen dethroned, her kingdom of lies crumbling around her. Back at home, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he turned. Because history, real history, can't be rewritten forever.
Sparkles the end.